Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Jake Hatch, Parker Ainsworth along for the ride here on this Friday. All right, so Parker, the Houston Cougars ranked 14th in the country, and BYU heads down to the Fertitta Center. Did I pronounce that right? Is it the Fertitta Center or Fertitta?
Fertitta. He's a restaurant mogul and entertainment mogul. He also owns the Rockets for folks that are in NBA basketball. He's Mr. Houston in a lot of ways.
Tillman Fertitta. Okay, there we go. And I knew of his renown because he's involved in everything, it feels like, there in Houston. But this is a big matchup, a big early season matchup here in the Big 12 Conference, because BYU is kind of that plucky upstart program. And I say that in the sense because Kelvin Young, BYU finished 5th in the conference last year, lose their head coach, and Parker for about a week there was like, oh boy, what's BYU going to do? Well, all they did is go and hire Kelvin Young, and he's essentially just had the Midas touch with everything. Landon top-rated recruits like AJ DeBonsa, bringing in Jaeger Demon, who looks like he's a top 5 pick in next year's NBA draft. There's a lot to look forward to with this matchup, but Houston, man, they're a really, really wily veteran squad, and Kelvin Sampson's among the best when it comes to the college basketball coaching ranks. What are the chances that Kelvin Sampson says, hey, Kevin, you may be doing some good things here, but you got a lot to learn when it comes to this matchup with the Cougs versus the Cougs?
Well, I would first start off, I guess, with that Kelvin has expressed that BYU is a very good program. Like, he has said that throughout the week, and he is not taking them lightly by any stretch. You mentioned that he came for the NBA ranks. Kevin Young did. The Suns, the Sixers, and I guess some like smaller level like G League kind of stuff before that. And his pro resume obviously helped them get Demon and then DeBonsa for next year very, very quickly, right? The deal with basketball is there's 5 guys on the court, so one makes a real big difference. Houston's biggest thing that you mentioned is veteran guys returning. Of their 8-man rotation last year, they returned 7. The one they did not was Big 12 Player of the Year Jamal Shead. So obviously it's a pretty big hole to fill, and they've had trouble with that in a couple of close contests early. But playing at home with veteran leadership, Jawan Roberts, LJ Cryer. It sounds like Emmanuel Sharp's kind of playing through some ankle, lower leg stuff. But honestly, it's a really, really talented roster that won the regular season by 2 games last year in the Big 12. Name the game is defense, so it now make it ugly. BYU, from what I've been watching, Jake, is kind of the opposite of that. That was my episode on Thursday. I was talking about how this is a styles makes fights and styles clash here kind of thing. What have you enjoyed, I'll ask positively, about the first half year of Kelvin Young?
Well, the fact that he's been very innovative with his offenses. Now, Jaeger Demon, who he's kind of the freshman sensation, a 6'9" playmaking guard. He's been out for a month until the Arizona State game. He had missed almost an entire month's worth of games, and he looked very much like a guy who needs some time to get back into game shape with that layoff. But the fun part about this is without him, all Kelvin Young has done is essentially say, hey, next man up. And they have been very good about retooling the offense on the fly to feature their best player, whoever it might be on the court at the time. We just saw on Tuesday night in a blowout, Tuesday afternoon, I should say, in a blowout of Arizona State, Richie Saunders goes for a career-high 30 points, Parker. And John Rothstein has been very quick to call this guy like the ultimate glue guy. And he said he may be shedding that glue guy moniker because he's become an offensive force for BYU. So that's the thing, is the offense has come a long way, but the defense has made strides as well. They lost at Providence in that Big 12, Big East challenge game. They went to Rhode Island and got blitzed pretty heavily by Providence in that game. And essentially since then, Parker, they've been much better defensively, but I'm telling you, Arizona State and everybody else that they faced in the lead up to this game against Houston, they pale in comparison of what Houston, I think, brings to the table. Because you mentioned the fact they bring 7 of the 8 guys of that rotation come back. They beat BYU in Provo 75-68 last January. So I think this is a BYU squad that the veteran players like Dallin Hall and Richie Saunders remember what happened a year ago in Provo, but they also understand that this is a massive, massive challenge. Because I want your thought on this. It sure feels like Kelvin Sampson is going to have something schemed up to make sure that guys like Jaeger Demon, Richie Saunders, Cannon Catchings, kind of the offensive weapons that BYU has, he's going to make sure that they have every opportunity to get locked up by the Houston Cougars.
Yeah, and I've been trying to take guesses at a dartboard as far as which one it will be that he shuts down. But there'll be one of them he essentially removes from the game, and it's nothing personal against Kevin Young or anyone. His deal is much like Bill Belichick at the NFL level. It's like, I'm going to take what you do best. I'm going to take one of your guys, and I'm going to make you beat me with somebody else, right? And if that's Demon, if that's catching, I thought Cannon catching shot the ball pretty well as well. Like if taking one of those guys away and say, okay, one hand's tied behind your back. Now, can you do it still? And if halftime's different, we'll adjust and change how we're doing it then. I don't know which of those three-headed monster people you're talking about he's going to do it with. The hardest to me is Demon, because as an assist guy, as a creative guy, you can't keep him from passing the ball. I don't know how you do that with him.
Well, hey, and that's a very good point, because if I were trying to scheme up to defend BYU, I would deny Demon every opportunity to facilitate, because as you mentioned, he's become an elite facilitator. His shot is still not quite there. That's kind of the big question mark with him, is his shooting going to come around where he can be that true weapon on the perimeter? But you mentioned the fact that he can facilitate this BYU offense. If I was Kelvin Sampson and the Houston Cougars, I would make every effort to deny him the ball and make sure that he does not facilitate, and essentially tell Richie Saunders, Cannon Catchings, Dallin Hall, any of the other players on the court for BYU, hey, if you guys end up being the weapon, yeah, we'll adjust as necessary, but we are not going to let Demon get us early.
So you mentioned you had a month without him. What did you think of the way offense flow? Because it flows very well with him running the point guard type of role as a forward. What did it look like you watch him every game, in your eye, without him on the floor?
It actually was okay, because here's the thing. Dallin Hall, who's the kind of the off guard, they play off each other, him and Jaeger Demon as the two ball handlers in this offense. Dallin Hall missed the early part of the season when Jaeger was really kind of at the peak of his powers early on this season. He had a toe injury that he was rehabbing from, speaking of Hall. And essentially when Jaeger went out, Dallin Hall had just come back, and he essentially stepped into that playmaking role and was quite adept at it. So the nice part is they found options with both of those guys essentially being able to step in for one another. Now, can you get both of them together doing what they've been doing at different points this season, where they can be that two-headed monster? Because if they can do that, it's going to be very difficult to defend both of them, because their ability to facilitate, and more importantly, in the case of Hall, hit big shots and timely shots, could be a big key to BYU notching an upset potentially on Saturday.
I want to hear more about potential upsets, because they got one guy that's a high-energy guy that I really like on the BYU roster, and I think the matchup's going to be fun. But that, I feel like, sounds like the next time. So let's get there in a second.
All right, Parker. So you said there's an energy guy that you are hoping, I guess, doesn't hurt Houston in this game. You didn't give me a name, so I am very curious which guy you are targeting here.
Well, I'm going to butcher it, which is part of the problem. But I've watched a game and a half as of the recording of this of BYU to get ready to get what I'm going to see happen on Saturday. Kiba Kita looks like a Houston Cougar in every way to me. Energy, long arms, a little undersized technically, but makes up for the high motor. He's a very traditional Houston Cougar center in that way. I liked watching him play. So Arizona State and part of the Ole Miss game thus far. What can you tell me about Kiba Kita? And please tell me he's not going to beat my Houston Cougars on Saturday. Don't tell me that part.
So it's Kiba Kita.
Oh, so I was wrong. Perfect. Gotcha.
But you were close. Here's the thing: you're not the only one that will guess it that way. He is a guy that BYU's been very aware of for years, because he played his high school ball in Mount Pleasant, Utah, at a private school called Wasatch Academy. They play in the EYBL. They play in these elite private school leagues across the country. And he was a guy that BYU had targeted about coming to BYU. He ultimately went to Utah for a couple of years. But when Kevin Young hired Chris Burgess to join his staff from Utah, well, Kiba Kita was very quick to jump into the portal and follow Chris Burgess south to Provo. And yes, he is, I think Houston fans, they will get a look at him and say, yeah, this guy would fit totally with what Houston likes to do with their big men. Because you mentioned he's 6'8". He's built like a Greek god. He's chiseled out of
jacked. Dude, he's jacked.
Yeah. And he's got the athleticism to match that physicality. So he fits the bill of what you want. Yes, you'd like to have him be 4 inches taller and be a true 7-footer. Everybody would. But what he lacks in overall height, he makes up for in spades with his athleticism. The biggest thing for him right now, Parker, is his offensive inability to really stretch the floor. He is a true rim rolling big man. So that's the thing about this is guys like Jaeger Demon, Dallin Hall, they'll have him come on ball screens. And if they can find him going to the rim, they'll lob it into him and let him do his thing. But he's not necessarily the biggest back to the basket guy, nor is he a guy who can step out and hit a 15, 18, 20-foot jump shot. Their other big man, though, Fousseyni Traore, similar, undersized big man. He is more of that traditional back to the basket when you need a bucket, toss it in there, let him go to work. And I think Houston fans saw him last year. Foose played against Houston in that game, if I recall correctly. So they've got two different big men that BYU can throw at Houston. The biggest thing is beyond those two, there's not a lot of depth. So foul trouble will absolutely be a critical thing in this game.
Well, and I don't mean to rain on your parade or spoil your turkey. I don't know which metaphor I'm going to go with there. But Jawan Roberts being a focal point of the offense was kind of a thing that Houston fell on last year. They hadn't really fallen to that this year. And then Oklahoma State, he turned around and got 20 points. And frankly, I argued they should have given the ball more. 20 points on 13 shots.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
And he's the power forward. And so I don't know who covers him as a power forward. He's a very traditional, like 1990s, 2000s power forward. He's only 6'8", 6'9", right, himself. But I guess the Keita thing to me was he's the high rebound guy, and he's not like a guy like he's built like a Greek guy, like you said, but he's not a 7-footer that's a high rebound guy. He's high motor high rebound guy. So you mentioned low post depth. Do they ever go? I mean, with all these shooters and Demon running point, do they ever go to just spread it out and have no big men on the floor? I mean, they got the height to do it at other positions, I would imagine.
They tried that at multiple points earlier this season. Mihailo Boskovic, he is another addition that's new to the roster this year. He's a former EuroLeague youth star. They brought him in with the whole thought that he could be kind of that 5-out big man for them because he's legitimately 6'11", Parker, 6'10", 6'11". But the problem is he's kind of found himself as the odd man out in this rotation. It was too big of a rotation. They were playing 10, 11 guys, and Kelvin Young has made it a point. He said, I've got to cut this down. And this past game, we didn't see Mihailo go into that game. So it feels like BYU is essentially going to go with a 4-out, 1-in. Just that's kind of I think, their identity this season. I think ideally in future iterations of this BYU basketball program, they will be able to play 5-out. And maybe at some point they find that option during this Big 12 season. But in this game, Parker, it doesn't feel like they'll be able to play that 5-out alignment because it would be something they would love to do to spread Houston out a little bit to open up that lane. But I just don't see the ready-made option to allow them to truly play that style.
I'm never going to force them from Provo to gamble, but I will ask you a question here because on KenPom, they got Houston favored by 11 points. Mm-hmm. I would say as a home team, that's not actually that crazy a spread given the discrepancy in ratings and standings and things like that. I think that's fairly respectful of BYU, I guess I should say. And so what are you anticipating, predicting? What do you think of the 11-point KenPom analytical spread? And I imagine you think it's going to be closer than that at least, right?
Well, I would hope so. Here's the deal. Ken Pomeroy actually lives here in Utah. I've gotten to know him fairly well over the years, and I trust his ratings more than anybody else's out there. And that may be just personal bias because I know the guy and I like him a lot. I think 11 points is valid in this instance, Parker, because BYU, with the fact that they've had guys like Richie Saunders and Jaeger Demon miss time in the past month or so, they really haven't been able to really narrow in on what their set rotation is going to be. And the other thing is that rotation, it's been streaky with regards to its outside shooting. So with that combination of factors where the rotation may not be fully what they want it to be, because if this game were played maybe 2 or 3 weeks from now, I think you'd have a better idea of what the rotation was going to be and a better idea of what the overall shooting prowess of the squad was. But right now, with those question marks lingering over this team, I think 11 points is a valid number. But if BYU's shooting does show up on the road there in the Fertitta Center, BYU could make that a 4 or 5 point game easily, but I've got questions if they can find enough consistency in the outside shooting game to keep them in this one.
Well, and it's funny you say that because I worry about if this turns into a shootout. Again, on my Thursday episode, I talk about styles and fight and so on. Houston's offense is still missing that Jamal Shed guy from a year ago that just says, hey, I put everyone in the backpack and we're going forward with this kind of thing, right? They're kind of figuring out who that is. They've had moments where it's a different guy, but it hadn't been one guy for 40 minutes at any point this year. And I mean, Jamal Shed literally would play 40 minutes a game last year. And so if this gets into a thing where BYU's hot and it is high scoring, I worry about can Houston keep up? Houston's defense is going to make it be somebody we haven't talked about yet that gets hot, right? That's part of the deal. It's going to be someone down the bench. I'm going to pull up a random name here. I don't know. Let me pull up the roster down the depth chart. It's going to be Boskovic. I don't. Sure, it'll be.
He's been out of the rotation, but there's no reason he couldn't do it because he has shown an ability to shoot from the outside and be that kind of that true stretch big man. So there is a chance that one of those guys, Dallin Hall, hasn't really gone off for a big game that I really consider to be a big game for him this year. That would be a big opportunity for him to do that. He was the guy last year when BYU went into Lawrence, Kansas and beat the Jayhawks. It was Dallin Hall's show down the stretch. He hit a big shot over Hunter Dickinson that it'll be played on BYU highlight reels for years to come because it was just right in your face, bullseye. And I was like, wow, okay, that kid's got some stones. So they need somebody to step up. And you mentioned the fact that Houston needs a Jamal Shed type player. BYU needs that same thing. It's kind of been by committee for BYU on that front with regards to who takes the scoring load on a given night. But in a game like this, when you're a decided underdog going to get against a team like Houston, you need like a Richie Saunders 30-point performance from Tuesday. If he could translate over to another 20-25-point performance down there in Houston, that would go a long way to helping BYU hopefully pull off an upset.
I think it's going to be a fun game and a good game, and Big 12 basketball is a big thing to me. I really love Big 12 basketball because the games are just physical and they're fun and they're close and competitive. We got to agree on one thing, though, before we get out of here.
Okay.
Y'all got them once. We got them twice. You mentioned you did it last year. Can we just all beat Kansas? Can we just all beat Kansas?
I'm totally okay with that. They're coming to Provo for the first time in quite some time later this season. And, yeah, I would love nothing more than to make the Jayhawks be even more upset than they were last year when BYU beat them on their home court.
Yeah, me too. We should all do that. All of us.
Yeah. Make the Jayhawks unhappy. And I'm sure that Derek Johnson from Locked On Jayhawks is going to be very angry at both of us for saying that, but that's okay. Well, Parker, thanks so much for doing this. It's always good to catch up with our fellow hosts across the network. If BYU fans, that Thursday episode you talked about contrast and styles, if they want more on BYU and Houston to lead up to this game, where can they find your work?
Well, I apologize. I found I mispronounced like 3 names on it so far, but you can find me at Painsworth512 on all your social media handles and stuff like that. And then Locked On Cougs, much like Locked On Cougars, is everywhere you get your podcast. I think it's up on YouTube and all the audios. There was some people talking about audio issues, but I think mine have been out there on the audio side of things this week, so we're good there.
All right. Well, and if Houston fans, you want more of my thoughts on BYU, check out Locked On Cougars wherever you get your podcasts. It's on YouTube, as Parker mentioned. But if you want my thoughts on all things sports, you can check out our show feeds, Locked On Cougars on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, or you can check me out on X/Twitter at Jacob C. Hatch. Well, Parker, I'm sad this is the only matchup between these two this year. I was hoping we were going to get the double dip with Houston, but hopefully maybe we see you guys in March or something like that. All right.
Yeah, that's a Big 12 tourney time at least, right? That's going to be fun. That'd be fun.
It would be a lot of fun. Well, thanks again for doing this, my man. And I'll be sure both of us will have postcast editions, I'm sure, shortly after this game goes final tomorrow afternoon. We'll have a full reaction come up in the weeks ahead. But Parker, thanks as always, my man. Hope all is well with you, and a happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to go Cougs. We can all say that part, right? Go Cougs. We all say that.
Go Cougs. Yeah, we all say that. Come on. We all say that. All right. Well, thanks again for making Locked On Cougs and Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you for being with us. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougs and Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And more importantly, thank you for being everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Cougs and the Locked On Cougars podcast.